Well, in the studio with me now is Jeff Gable. He's head of research for ABSA Group. That's the bank that was formerly known as Barclays Africa. Jeff, very good afternoon to you. Now, what about that move in the gold price? Is this just safety buying, do you think?
Well, I think there's an element of that. You mentioned tensions in the Middle East. Of course, over the last few months, we've seen an enormous repricing in global interest rate markets. Expectations that the U.S. Fed would cut interest rates, 10-year yields across the globe falling precipitously. That's a very good environment for gold. And sat in South Africa, one of the world's major gold producers, not bad news for us at all.
Now, you mentioned we've been talking about climate change this week. Of course, South Africa, you're right in the sort of front line of the battle here. What's been going on in Cape Town with water shortages and so on? Well,
I was very interested in the previous interviews you had where they were talking about maybe a fifth of the UK's energy supply coming from solar. Of course, it's much sunnier in southern Africa than it is here in the UK. We in Africa are very much at the front line where global warming is impacting us. Mozambique had 2 enormous cyclones earlier this year. We're only about a year past when Cape Town had faced the real possibility of being the world's first major urban city to run out of water. So climate change and the risks around that are very front of mind for us.
And is that impacting on GDP growth?
Well, water to an important extent, but our more, at least in South Africa, the bigger issue for us has actually been just energy supply. So away from this discussion around greening of the economy, we have a sort of monopoly producer in South Africa that's undergoing very significant sort of capacity constraints around financial constraints. We saw the economy in South Africa in the first quarter shrink by almost 3%.
And I mean, it's interesting, the 3 big motors of growth in sub-Saharan Africa are Angola, Nigeria and South Africa, and none of them are growing particularly strongly right now, are they?
Barely 1% average over the last 3 or 4 years, and that's really impacted the way that people think not just about Angola and Nigeria and South Africa, but the way they've been thinking about the entire continent. We've gone through a period where people recognized Africa as being a huge economic opportunity to having a question mark over it. And I think in many ways that's unfair. The challenges South Africa has, Nigeria has, Angola, are in many ways very country-specific. What we do know is that, according to the IMF at least, 6 of the world's 10 fastest-growing economies this year are in Africa. Over the next 5 years, half of the world's fastest-growing economies will be on the continent. So we should be thinking about Africa as an opportunity rather than focusing always on some of these challenges.
Well, one country that certainly sees Africa as an opportunity, of course, is China. And we've had a warning today from the US not to expect Africans not to expect debt relief if they get too in hock to the Chinese. What did you make of that?
Listen, it's not just to China. Everyone taking on debt must be mindful that the projects for which you're borrowing this for must be economic in nature. We don't want to have white elephants anywhere around the world, and certainly in Africa, where we are, for the most part, savings poor and we're desperate for infrastructure, we really can't afford those white elephants at all. So I understand sort of the geopolitical tensions between sort of China's engagement with Africa, Europe's engagement in the US. But the broad message here is the right projects done at the right price should pay for themselves. And in that case, the debt is less an issue.
All right, Jeff Gable from ABSA Group. Very good to see you. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.